As you heard yesterday from Matthew Shapira, the cash challenges have seen a variety of diversity of approaches that have been applied to a variety of targets across a number of challenges. He put something to the effect: the diversity of method reflects an intensely dynamic and exploratory community. And Matthew nicely summarized the ambition of cash, the benefits, and the purpose, and how it helps to shine light, in his words, to identify the best computational techniques for hit finding. And I think it's because of these insights and identifying sort of really the cutting edge computational methodologies is the reason why UCB, along with some other pharma, we sit on the governing board of CASH. It has been immensely helpful and useful in identifying really state-of-the-art technologies for hit finding. So in this session, particularly focuses on sort of, you will hear the details behind some of the best performing teams for the first 3 cash challenges. But before we introduce the first speaker, just a quick word on the structure of the session. So we'll have 4 speakers in total, about 20 minutes talk each, and then we'll be followed by 5-7 minutes of Q&A. We do have one speaker who has already joined us virtually, Dr. Mykola Protopopov. I hope I say that correctly. And is currently unable to leave Ukraine, but we wanted to do what we could to accommodate so that he could join to talk about what Chemspace actually did for the approach. Chemspace participated in Cash 2 and Cash 3. Dr. Protopopov is joining us virtually. I think he's already there. You can see him on the screen. Mykola, can you hear me?
Hello everyone, it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to be attended on the Conscience Symposium and share the results and some thoughts with you. I believe that many of us are aware of Cash Challenge 2 details, so I will focus my presentation on the topic of gigascale screening, particularly using classical molecular docking approach and its future directions. Over the past 3 decades, the available chemical space for ligand discovery has grown rapidly from hundreds of thousands to billions of compounds. This expansion has led to noticeable improvements in both the hit rate and potency of compounds identified through library docking. Given this, choosing the right source of compounds is a crucial step in any screening campaign. And one of the largest and most reliable sources of compounds today is the real collection from enamine. Enamine reels share several case advantages such as high synthetic access rate, over 80% competitive pricing, validated chemical procedure, and fast lead time of compounds, typically 3-4 weeks. The real compounds represented in a few libraries. It's a real database. The smallest one contains 9.6 billion of enumerated compounds, which could be downloaded from enamine website. Real space library contains around 70 billion of compounds. It's not enumerated, but it could be easily accessible through Infinity software from Biomolecular. And the largest one, it's enamine X real space. It contains approximately 5 trillion of compounds, and this space also not enumerated and could be available through Infinity software from Biomolecular. Managing and screening such massive chemical databases poses unique challenges, so several approaches are available to handle this scale effectively. One of them is a fast GPU-based docking, where scaling with more GPU cores accelerates screening. Also, it could be a combination of classical docking and machine learning methods such as active learning or deep learning to accelerate screening with machine learning approach. And nowadays becomes more popular pure machine learning based approaches, which also could be used for screening massive chemical database. However, it's important to note that even this, with modern technique, working with a library of 1 billion of compounds remain challenging, and it's generally only feasible when dealing with fully enumerated spaces. But real database and space are much bigger than 1 or even 10 billion of compounds, and some of them, like spaces, they are not enumerated, so we could handle also with not enumerated spaces. So to dealing with this, we decided to use a novel West-Synthesis approach to work with X-real space, which in 2022 contained around 176 billion of molecules. So here is represented West workflow of West-Synthesis. West-Synthesis, its approach, which was presented in 2022 in a Nature publication. The method was developed by Professor Cartridge and his group in collaboration with Inamine and Chemspace team. West-Synthesis algorithms are compatible with ICM Pro MolSoft software, and Chemspace out-licensed West-Synthesis and has permission to use it for commercial and non-commercial projects. The idea behind West-Synthesis is to use the modularity of Inamine Real, and the general workflow involves 4 iterative steps. First one is generate such kind of minimal enumeration library of fragments that represent all possible syntons and scaffold combination in the real space. These steps should be done once, and then we could use this library for screening for different targets. The next step is docking the MEL fragments in the target binding pocket and select a subset of the high scoring fragment for further enumeration. And the third step is enumerate synton and at the second attach point of the fragment subset. And the next step is to redock the enumerated subset into the receptor. For those real molecules that contain 3 syntons, the steps 3 and 4 should be repeated until molecule completion. Fully enumerated molecules then can be redocked with more elaborated docking setting and further post-processed for the final candidate set selection. So the main idea of the West-Synthesis is to divide the space on the component and work with them. So on the slide you could see the difference between two kind of space. One of them is 11 billion real space, which was described in the original West-Synthesis publication, and the new one, X-real space, which was used for Cache Challenge 2 study. So you could see that 11 billion real space contains up to 80,000 of unique reactants. In the same time, much more bigger space contains only around 100,000 of reactants, and the number of reactions is not so significantly different also. So we have a minimum enumerated library for 11 billion real space. It was 600,000 fragments, and for X real space it was only 2 million fragments. So this number could be easily handled with classical docking approach, so we could use it for our screening. On this slide represented how enumeration work, and in our real space, X-real space, we have compounds divided into 3 groups. It's 2 component, 3 component reaction compounds, and such called bridge component reactions that actually is a variation of three component reaction, but typically based on diamino bridge building blocks. Each type of compounds proceeds separately, resulted in the three minimal enumeration library subsets. These MEL compounds include a reaction scaffold with one attachment point fully enumerated with selected syntons from X-real space, while the other attached point or points are kept with minimal R groups, such as methyl or phenyl, depending on the reaction chemistry at those points. This was done to avoid the functional group which involves in the reaction and avoid the interaction of these groups with our target to have only effective interaction which also would be presented in full enumerated compounds. During the iterative enumeration process, one of the kept R group is replaced by the appropriate full synton from the synton library. For two-component reaction compounds, the is completed in one step by replacing the cap with the corresponding syntons. For three-component reaction and for bridge component reaction, the initial MEL fragments sequentially enumerate with two other syntons. So we have a two-step of enumeration. Such algorithms ensure that the MEL fragments grow iteratively into fully enumerated molecules within the constraints of X-real space, while at each step maintaining chemical similarity to the final molecules through the scaffold capping. The resulting MEL contained around 2 million of compounds. Here represented how it works in 3D. So initially we dock the fragments into our binding pocket and then we grow. On this example shows that our coordinate of initial fragment have the same location as one time grown fragment of, on this example, it's a bridge-like compound. So we grow in our compounds and it fill different sub-pockets during each enumeration step when we got the full enumerated compound. So we adjust the original protocol because we use 16 bigger space. So we decided to use more fragment on the step of on the selection of fragment from minimum enumeration library. Then we enumerated more compounds in further steps, but this number is still good for classical docking style. It's like few million of compounds which could be easily docked in our target. And finally, we select the hit compounds. So the target for Cache2 challenge it's SARS-CoV-2 NSP13 protein and the ground-based work by Joseph Newman and colleagues who conducted admirable work in determining high-resolution crystal structure for full length SARS-CoV-2 NSP13 protein. So here we have like several binding pockets. One of them is ATP binding pockets, but we are focusing on RNA binding side and particularly 5' end of RNA binding site. So we have only three structure which have fragments in this pocket, and we decided to move on with structure 5RLZ, which have better resolution, and also in this structure we have quite good reproducibility of binding poses of fragments, also determined in the crystallographic screening. Um, because of lack of data, we can't use a raw curve or area under the curve calculation in this project. So the only metric which we decided for model validation is reproducibility of these few fragments that we have inside the pocket. Also, we decided to build model with two water molecule. This water molecule not interact with our target so uh, good, but with these two water, we have better reproducibility and better RMSD between docket poses and poses we have in crystal structure. So here you could see the pipeline for our study. So initially we start from a minimum enumeration library docking. We select around 100,000 fragments, and then we grow this fragment for full enumerated molecules. Approximately it was 3 million molecules per each type of compounds. Uh, Finally, we analyze the docking poses of fragments, and then we analyze docking poses of full enumerated molecules. So here is a heat selection workflow. So we start from basic toxicity filtration. So we filter out paints and some bad groups from the selection, and we work only with compounds which lies in the rule of 5 range. Then we utilize uh, different scoring function from our software. It's a classical docking score, and also we use so-called RTCNN score, which shows not affinity to our target, but the how nature the pose we get after the docking, and we analyze um, like we do cutoff of both of these uh, score, and then we try to make some hypothesis of interaction our ligands with the uh, with, with the binding pockets. So we decided to try to select as much as more diverse binding modes, and then we cluster our compounds. We also utilize not classical clusterization mechanism. So our compounds they have code which represent the name, and actually this name uh, is represent the particular structure of the symptom. So we utilize clustering based on the symptom, which works more effectively than clusterization just using Morgan fingerprints and other chemical fingerprints, because we could know the number of particular substructures in the final selection. So after all this procedure, we examine all binding molds by our experts, and finally we selected 77 compounds for biological assessment. Biological assessments show that we have 6 hit compounds, which called by cache organized as a hit. So the main idea of this slide, I think, to show that even after growing the space, after dramatically growing the space, the synthesis also show a good results in identify a hit compounds through this huge chemical space. So current step of the best synthesis, nowadays we have 2.7 trillion of compounds, which could be easily managed with this approach. And the next step we move to it's move from 2.7 trillion X-real space to 5 trillion X-real space, which is current version at the moment. To do this, we adjust the protocol one more time. So we add few new steps. So we use fast GPU docking and we accelerate docking with active learning to more effectively cover the chemical space we have, and also we add some heavy calculation like MMP-BSA to avoid different false positive results. And also we improve data management, so we have smaller minimal enumerated library than we have for a smaller version on the space, because we select duplicates we have, and we work with code of these duplicate molecules. So if we have the same compounds based on the structure in minimal enumerated library, but these compounds have different code which comes from different reaction or different sub-reactions, and we still have this data to employ this data for further enumeration process. So on this stage, we enumerate around 120 million full compounds and analyze this number of compounds with fast GPU docking, active learning, accelerated docking, and final selection we analyze by classical docking with high effort settings to select as much as possible confident conformers. So all this work was done with a team, and I appreciate Olga Tarhanova, Yuri Moroz, and Olga Semenenko for helping with this presentation and also with this project. And I think it's a core idea to have a good team inside, and everything could be done. Thank you for your attention.
So our second speaker is Dr. Karina Machado, and she participated in the Cash 2, and as you heard from Matthew again yesterday, they had the best hit rate for Cash 2 challenge. Dr. Machado is an associate professor and coordinator of computational biology laboratory at the Federal University of Rio Grande in Brazil. Karina, the stage is yours. Yes.
So, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk with you about our RFL Bamboo strategy applied for Cash Challenge 2. I would like to start my presentation thanking the organizers for to be here, the invitation to be here to talk about our work in Brazil. Well, just a very brief overview about my professional path. So I'm a computer engineer, so I'm from the computational background. I have been working with molecular docking and this kind of data, machine learning applied to this kind of data since my master's in 2005. So just a brief context from where we are from Brazil, but the very south of Brazil. So here's the map of Brazil. We are in the south. We are in the southest university of the whole country. So in the city called Rio Grande, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. Perhaps you have heard about our state last year because of the catastrophic flood. We stayed without airport for months. So we are very close to Uruguay, just to see where we are. So I did a very long trip to be here, more than 24 hours. So this is our university. It's a regional university in Brazil. We are, it's called Federal University of Rio Grande. And we have around 9,000 students of undergraduate and 3,000 students of graduate courses. And our university has nowadays around 20 graduate programs and 61 undergraduate program courses. So this strategy for participate of Cash Challenge 2 was proposed by two bioinformatics groups. For our group that's coordinated by me and Adrian, that's here too. So this is CombiLab, Computational Biology Laboratory. We created this group in 2012, since we started at the university. And working together with us, we had Omics Lab. Omics Lab is coordinated by Frederico Kremer in the Federal University of Pelotas. Pelotas is a city really close to Rio Grande, so we are some like 30 minutes by car. So we talked a lot, we have projects together, and we proposed this strategy to participate of Cash Challenge 2 together. So I'm going to present now our strategy. Cash Challenge 2, as who was here yesterday, we could discuss a little bit about this challenge. It has as target receptor the NSP13 target receptor from SARS-CoV-2. This is a protein that is really conserved between different variants and other SARS-CoV versions of this virus. And this challenging, it started in September of 2022 and goes until September of 2024. So it was 2 years of work, from where we needed to submit three different results, different moments where we submitted results to during the challenging. So we have the hit identification, the merged selections, and the hit optimization that I'm going to detail really soon. So from all the groups that participated of Cash Challenge 2, it was 23 groups. We were the only group that was from the global south of the road, so it is different, an outlier, and the only one coordinated by women. And the combination of the results of these 3 moments of submissions, we obtained the highest score between all the groups participating. So this is some news that we had about this result in Brazil and out of Brazil. We tried to have more news and people talking about, but it's not easy to be close to the general press. So about our strategy, I'm going to detail our strategy for the 3 moments of submissions. Hit identification that we done in 4 stages, merged selections and hit optimization. So the hit identification is stage 1. It was what we called the DB diverse. In this step, we tried to propose to generate a diverse data set obtained directly from an amine. So as a starting point, we used the anamine zinc 20 version that has 5 million of molecules. We choose this one because it has the molecules in the 3D version already ready for using for docking. So having this, using Bamboo, that it's an in-house software developed by Frederico in Omics Lab, we generated Morgan fingerprints for each of these 5 million of molecules. We didn't use it all at this moment, but in the future. So using these Morgan fingerprints, we did a random selection of around 132,000 of molecules. We need to do this subsampling random because we didn't have computational resources to deal with 5 million of molecules. So we needed to just the beginning reduce these numbers. That's something that maybe the other participants don't have to deal with, this necessity of reducing. So for these molecules, we applied the PCA model to what we call the fingerprinting denoising, that we needed to reduce the number of bits that represented each molecule because 2048 was too big, so we maintained the 95% of the variance, and then we generated this denoise version of the fingerprints. And together with a UMAP, we generated a representation of each molecule in just 3 components, and then we applied this representation of the molecules to a hierarchical and density HB scan algorithm of clustering. So finally, from this result, we had around 1,940 clusters that had at least 10 molecules in each. And from this, we selected some representative molecules of each cluster. Finally, we had a database with around 12,400 molecules that we called the DB diverse. We expect that this database could represent the 5 million starting database. So, considering these molecules, we performed the docking simulations using VINA version 1.2 and a framework for virtual screening that is developed by our lab. Just to show you what it is very briefly. In this interface, we configure all the virtual screening experiment, where you can vary the receptor, the ligand, and also the grid box. So we can do different grid box and the same simulation, and also incorporate the flexibility of the receptor. And then we can generate the script and perform it in a cluster environment, for example, if you have one. So, having all these docking results, we proposed in the stage 3, the creation or the development of a target-specific scoring function. So it was a scoring function specific to any SP13. So I'm going to detail this target-specific scoring function. So it was trained. It was like a stacked model that combines a deep learning model with a light GBM algorithm too. And in this deep learning, we used as input as predictive attributes the denoised fingerprints of these 12,400 molecules, and as target attribute the scores predicted by VINA in our framework. And then this was the data we used to train this target-specific scoring function. This is our deep learning model that was composed by 10 dense layers with a decreased number of neurons. And then this model was combined with a light GBM model parameterized using the Flemel regression model framework to find the best parameters for this algorithm. And then this combination of these two machine learning algorithms, that was our final target-specific scoring function. So now, finally, we could consider the 5 million of molecules that we had as a starting point from an amine, and then we submitted it to our target-specific, and we have a list of all these molecules with their respective scores according to our target-specific scoring function. We didn't have computational research to perform docking for all these, but submitted them to our target-specific scoring function was really, really fast, so we could do that. So finally, in the last step of hit identification, the stage 4, we take all these top-ranked 2,400, the 5 million docking results, not docking, the scores obtained by target-specific scoring function. We choose just the first 1,000 top-ranked, and then we submitted them to docking simulations, because most of these molecules are not in our starting data set of the DB diverse. So we extracted the best docking positions and submitted them to other scoring functions. We decided here to not use only the VIN score, but a combination of scores. So we used the VINA version 1.2, that is VINA 2021, the old version of VIN scores, and the other 3 machine learning scoring functions. So one is our in-house scoring function called RFL score, and the other two was the machine learning scoring functions that obtained very good results in the last CASF 2016. So Delta Vina and Delta Vina XGB, that was the same authors of Delta Vina and appears in 2021. So just a very briefly explanation about these scoring functions. Vina are empirical scoring functions, and Delta Vina and Delta Vina XGB are machine learning. And I would like to highlight our RFL score machine learning scoring function is a scoring function we have been working for many times. So this version and new versions we have been working with. So in this machine learning scoring function, we have as a starting point different data sets, including the PDB bind, but also KISAR. Sometimes we trained with DUGI also to try to incorporate a little bit noisy. And then from this data, we generated around 722 attributes using different tools like Banana, Padera, or the kit, and the terms of Vina, that is 58 different molecular descriptors. And then we applied different feature selection algorithms from where LASSO was the best result, but we tried others. And then we use it as algorithm for training our scoring functions, the random forest. And here we also try different ones, but the best combination in this work was LASSO with random forest, okay? And then we applied the most classical benchmark, that is CASF, to evaluate. And we use this scoring function combined with the other ones. Our combination was a simple weighted average. All the scores were normalized, and then we combine it with an average, okay? The average with different weights depending on the scoring function. And then this is our final 8 hits that is based on the results of the experimental a step of cache challenge. So all these tests was not performed by us, but by the organizer of cache challenge. And this is our 8 molecules. Here you can see where the top ranked score docking of each molecule is in the NSP structure. So 6 of them, the top ranked was in the RNA site. 1, the 75, was in the ATP site. And 1, that's the 98, is out of these 2 binding sites. But we were curious about this result. And we are repeating many times these docking simulations with this molecule 98. And we verified that in most of the simulations, the top ranked position is close to the RNA site. So we believe that this molecule interacts in this region as the others. So this is the hit identification. The second moment of cache challenge that was almost in parallel of some steps of hit identification was the merged selections. In here, we received from the cache a list of the 100 molecules of each group that was participating, and we needed to rescore all these molecules. So we did almost the same strategy. We generated the 3D structures and optimized these structures because we received it in a SMILES format. And then we performed docking simulations and applied the same consensus score using the same 5 scoring functions, the same combination. But also the organizers asked us to submit together with the ranking information about each molecule, that if it is potent, weak, or inactive. So what we did was simple too. We discretized each one of these scores between these 3 classes, potent, weak, or inactive, each one with our discretization, usually according to equal frequency. And then we did the voting, a simple voting, to identify each molecule of this new ranking. It was potent, weak, or inactive. So we go to the last step, that is the hit optimization. So from the 8 molecules that was heat of our submitted 100 molecules. We searching an amine by analogs using a simple tiny mode similarity index, and then it totalizes for each one of these hits. We selected from 50 to 100 of molecules. It depends on what the tiny mode similarity said to us. And then it totalizes around 559 molecules. Then we perform docking simulations, the same consensus score. And then finally we selected, we ranking all these molecules, but we ranked by hit, not all together, okay? Each hit has his own rank because we needed to submit from 5 to 10 molecules for each of our hits. So the rankings were by molecule. And this is our final results. Each of the steps: hit identification, merged selections, and hit optimization. This is the numbers of the molecules you suggested for hit optimization. I know that one was really good because Matthew showed us yesterday, but I didn't add the structure here in the presentation. And so I would like to end my presentation talking to you a little bit about the challenges to do research in a regional university in Brazil. We have a very limited funding. The country has limited funding for science and education. But if you are far from a big city like São Paulo, for example, the limitation is much bigger. So for example, we just bought the first cluster for our lab in 2023, and it cost $20,000. So I imagine that most of you has much more computational resources available to do your research than we have. So also, I would like to highlight how cash challenge is important for groups like us to be our methodologies evaluated by different experimental simulations, not simulations, but results. So this kind of evaluation, maybe we not have this opportunity in Brazil because it's too expensive to do this kind of validation experimentally. So I would like to highlight how important these kind of initiatives are for groups like us to have experimental validation of all the methodologies you have been working for 15 years in our lab. So thank you for your attention and for the organizers. I hope I didn't pass the time.
Our third speaker, Daniel Cole. So Dr. Cole is a reader and a UKRI future leader fellow in computational chemistry at Newcastle University. And his team participated in CASH2 also. And I think most of the software methods used were open source. So Daniel's going to tell a little bit more about that.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation over here. It's been a fantastic experience so far. Before I go into the CASH challenge, I'd like to give you a bit of background into the methods used. So I'm a physicist by training, so some of these methods may be a little bit different to what we've heard so far. So my interests lie, I can't see the screen down there. My interests lie in the use of structure-based molecular modeling for computer-aided drug design. And as we know, fast and accurate prediction of binding of a molecule to a structure would allow us to prioritize compounds for synthesis. So free energy calculations, which we haven't heard much about yet at this meeting, are a potential method to help us fit this need. So very briefly, these methods are based around molecular dynamics sampling of the protein-ligand complex with very rigorous thermodynamics to extract the free energy of binding of the molecule to the protein. So if we plot on the y-axis here the predicted free energy, if that correlates nicely with your experimental free energy, then you can really use these free energy calculations to prioritize your compounds. But these tend to be very reliant on the accuracy of the molecular mechanics force field that you use to do the sampling. And also on the sampling itself, so how long you run the simulation for. And that's very much related to the initial binding pose, which we've heard a lot about at this meeting. If your binding pose is wrong, then you're not going to recover that using the molecular dynamics. So talking about open software and going back to what Carmen mentioned yesterday, I just wanted to talk a bit about the Open Force Field Initiative, which I spend a lot of my time working with to try to improve these force fields for those free energy calculations. So the Open Force Field Leadership is led by the people on the right-hand side there, and this is an international collaboration between academia and industry to improve all of the science and infrastructure going into these force fields. So in particular, the focus is on generating these open source Python toolkits to allow users to assign force field parameters to molecules, and also on heavily curated quantum mechanical and physical property data sets and open infrastructure, which allow you also to go and fit your own force fields. And open science, of course, so everyone is welcome to get involved. So as proof of that, I've been getting involved with the initiative, and one of the open softwares that came out of my group in collaboration with the Open Force Field was this bespoke fit tool for parameterizing torsional parameters for molecules, which are very important for determining binding pose. So for this talk, I need to go one step further in terms of force field accuracy. We've talked a lot about machine learning, and machine learning potentials, I think, are a really good example of machine learning working well. Generally, when we do molecular modeling, we want to take a set of 3D coordinates of a molecule and output the potential energy and the forces. So usually for that, we use a force field by summing over bond and angle and dihedral terms. More generally, we write the energy of an atom I as a sum over all of its two-body components, so a function of all of the nearest neighbors J, and a sum over all the interactions involving neighbors J and K, and so on. And there are many different flavors of these machine learning potentials, but generally speaking, you can represent an atom using its neighborhood density, and then train up a machine learning model to reproduce the quantum mechanical energies and forces. And if you don't have enough data in your data set, just run some more quantum calculations. So in the field of organic force field design, the ANI machine learning potential has been around for a while. And I was fortunate enough to be involved with the development of MESOF, which is trained on the SPICE data set. And if we look at conformational energetics of molecules, in this case, torsional barrier heights, we can see that force fields are doing okay, but these machine learning potentials are really giving us a step change in accuracy, almost approaching the level of DFT. And importantly for this talk as well, it's been shown that we can combine these machine learning potentials with regular protein force fields to predict the binding poses of molecules in protein binding pockets. So we wanted to bring all this new functionality into the world of drug discovery. And this was really accelerated during the pandemic, as we've heard a lot about, by this typical problem. So quite early on during the pandemic, Bill Jorgensen's lab at Yale published a crystal structure for this molecule bound to the main protease binding pocket. And that group was also interested in developing larger molecules that fill the S4 pocket up here with these functional groups. And typically, when we go about setting up these binding poses, we're faced with sort of proprietary options like OpenEye and Maestro, but that doesn't really allow us to extend these software packages with these machine learning potentials that I talked about. So we set about developing our own software to get around this, which we call FE-Grow. I should say this is very much inspired by Bill Jorgensen's BOM software, which has been around for a few years now. So the idea here is that we maximize knowledge from crystallography by taking a core binding pose of the molecule. The user goes in, clicks on the functional groups they want to add, and the conformations of the functional group are enumerated, and any that clash with the protein just get thrown away. We can then bring in our machine learning potential here to very rigorously calculate the energetics of the molecule. And in this case, we use the ANI machine learning potential. So that gives us a structure of the molecule, and then we can throw that structure into a typical docking scoring function. In our case, we tend to favor the NINA convolutional neural network scoring function, but you can substitute in your favorite. So for example, for 13 different MPRO inhibitors, the NINA scoring function, you can sort of see some correlation with experiment there. And ideally, we would then take these structures forward to free energy calculations, and there we have a much better correlation, I think, in that case. And for this problem, we see decent structures coming out as well. Since it's already been mentioned by Kaz and by Jenke yesterday, hot off the press, we did enter this Polaris competition in collaboration with ASAP Discovery to try to predict ligand poses in the SARS-CoV-2 and MERS-CoV MPRO binding pockets. And you may recognize some of these molecules from Ed's talk this morning. So we did okay in this competition. We came about halfway down the leaderboard, but we didn't use any of the training data, very unusual in this conference. We just went straight to the physics. So some structures went very well. Some structures I'm not too worried about. This was counted as failure, but actually there's only a small difference in binding mode there. And some issues we knew about. This was definitely a failure. But in this case, we think that flexible sidechain modeling will help the software to predict poses like that one. So I should be talking about cache. So the Cache 2 challenge has already been extensively spoken about, so I'll skip this, except to say that our effort here was led by Ben Cree, who was a PhD student at the time. So we started from the fragments. So there are 3 fragments bound in the RNA binding pocket. And we also took a water map by analyzing a set of around, can't see that, around 60 different crystal structures available in the PDB, with the thinking that that water map would allow us to identify polar contacts. So it would be nice to recapitulate with our molecules. So we used FEGROW to grow these initial fragments. In particular, 2 of the fragments had a fairly similar binding mode, and we found that a 5-membered ring gave 3 vectors which allowed reasonable-looking growth vectors into the binding pocket. It's not too important what this gray molecule is on the right-hand side, but broadly speaking, we were trying to develop molecules like that one that recapitulated the binding modes of the 3 fragments. So yeah, one thing we weren't fully ready for, which we should have thought about beforehand, was that since we're doing de novo design, but we're being asked to purchase compounds from a catalog, as has been already spoken about, we had to add an extra step, which was just a similarity search between our compounds and the enamine catalog, which we then redocked. So we tried to take through a lot of molecules that were similar to our original designs, but also redocking also threw up some different binding modes. Unlike the previous 2 participants, I think, we also tried to synthesize our own compounds, and thanks to these medicinal chemists here for taking that on, but none of those were hits, unfortunately. Right, so yeah, so not so successful as the previous talk, but one of our compounds at least was a hit in this NSP13 SPR assay, which is the one pictured here. So you can see decent binding here. I'm not a medicinal chemist, but selectivity seems okay, and it's passed the solubility tests. And the panel of medicinal chemists put this hit in the top 5 from all the participants. as Karina mentioned, we were also asked to take the predictions of all of the other participants and classify them as binders or not binders. Somewhat to our surprise, we comfortably won that competition. So I wish I had a good story there, but really we just used the NINA software and docked everyone's compounds and used the NINA docking score as the classifier. So all the credit there goes to the NINA developers. Okay, and then this round 2 refinement was much more in our wheelhouse. This is what we do on a day-to-day basis. So in this case, we took our compound, we searched the enamine database for substructures that contain that compound, and then we went to those free energy calculations that I was talking about at the beginning. So we built all of the compounds that we could using FEGROW, and then started to feed them into free energy calculations. So this is the sort of prediction you can get out when we make the change from this molecule to this molecule. We get a favorable change in the binding free energy. Pleasingly, some of the compounds that contain those features that the free energy calculations were saying are favorable also came out in the second round of the competition. So overall, in the second round, 4 of our compounds showed a binding response between around 50 and 100 micromolar. So, as has already been mentioned, this is a really great opportunity for us to do something we probably wouldn't have done otherwise. But we also used it a lot as a learning opportunity to figure out what worked and what didn't work for us. So manual growth here is useful for idea generation, maybe for medicinal chemists to go in and have a play. But on this tight deadline, we need to bring in automation into the software. As I'm sure everyone would agree, more accurate scoring of the binding poses is needed. Every compound that we submitted to cache was predicted by the docking score to be low micromolar, but of course only one turned out to be. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a big fan of free energy calculations, so I hope this will be a big part of the answer to that question in the future. Similarity between our designs and available compounds in the chemical databases was generally low, so we need to figure out ways around that. And one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is this was slightly different to how we usually do drug discovery on internal programs, in that we tend to use many more rounds of structural biology to help guide the designs. I'm not saying that could have been worked in here, but it's maybe something to think about. How am I for time? Oh, yeah. Okay, so some of these lessons we did try to incorporate into a subsequent work, which has been published in Digital Discovery this year. And that is, if we take our core molecule and we start to think about how many linkers and functional groups we could add to that molecule, then you soon get these explosions in chemical space. And of course, as we heard in the first talk of this session, we can then use active learning to try to navigate our way through that chemical space. So we can use FEGROW to build and score a subset of those compounds, say 100 or so, and then start training up a machine learning model to predict the PK of all of those million compounds. You can then use your active learning to explore your chemical space, whether that's picking out the best molecules or further exploring where it has the largest uncertainty. So of course you start off with these millimolar type binders, and as you go through a few cycles of the active learning, then you sort of regularly picking out micromolar, submicromolar compounds according to the docking score, of course. And then related to what I was talking about with the difficulty of bringing in the enamine compounds, we can loop up the active learning with a regular search of the enamine database. So for these compounds that we think are going to be good, we can search for similar compounds and add them into our chemical space. So in that way, the active learning actually has the opportunity to start picking out compounds from the catalogue. So going back to the SARS-CoV-2 main protease, we applied this active learning cycle to design compounds back to that binding pocket. So we had some, we ordered a few compounds here, not very many. They weren't very potent, sort of millimolar or so. But looking through the full selection of compounds that this active learning cycle had picked out, we could see a lot of similarity between the sort of crowdsourced compounds that the COVID Moonshot initiative had picked out. So yeah, this automated active learning can pick these molecules out, but we need better ways to prioritize them so that they are ranked higher up in our list of priorities. And if we don't want to order compounds from catalogues and want to synthesize them ourselves, then we're having a look at the use of CREM to build these synthetically tractable chemical databases of compounds to search. So FEGROW is fully open source. Feel free to go and try it out. It was intended just to use to set up free energy calculations, but we've got a bit distracted and started using it for de novo drug discovery. Further accuracy improvements are needed, sampling side chain flexibility and improved scoring functions. And in red here is sort of what I want to get to in the next few years. So going from PDB fragments to libraries of synthesizable or purchasable compounds, accurate binding poses, and the challenges that we've seen at this workshop are going to be important for that, and then going into active learning and free energy calculations for prioritization of those compounds. Very open to suggestions, and in the time that's left of this conference, do grab me if you do have any of those. So yeah, thanks to the Newcastle Cache team and Ben and Rachel in particular, and big thanks to Conscience and Mathieu and the team at the SGC for this opportunity, and thank you for your attention.
We have the next and the last speaker for the symposium, Francesco Gentile. Francesco participated in Cache 1 and 3. His team had an excellent performance in Cache 3 in collaboration with Artem Cherkasov, who actually chaired the session yesterday. The floor is yours, Francesco.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm Francesco, and today I'd like to present a bit of overview of our experience with Cache 1 and Cache 3, and a bit of the lesson that, at least personally, I learned, or more like the type of things I discovered. I have no idea for the work in drug discovery. So to start this talk, I just like to introduce a bit the framework that we have used as the skeleton of our two campaigns, and is as you may have already thought from the title, is a application of artificial intelligence to accelerate docking, or more generally any physics-based calculation. And this is justified by the fact that there is a physical limit in screening experimentally libraries of compounds. Although in these 2 days we have seen many presentations about DNA encoded libraries, so this is probably, the figure is going to change in the next few years. But with the traditional wet lab screens is rarely above 1 million molecules, and most times like way less. But since the early 2005, there's been a lot of effort in put together publicly available virtual libraries, which were originally pioneered by the development of Zinc, which was firstly published in 2005, and consists of 700,000 compounds that were collected from various in-stock catalogs of different chemical vendors. So computational people like me could take these libraries, screen, and then order compounds. And now in this plot that maybe the font is a bit small, but the scale, the y-axis is in logarithmic, those type of libraries witnessed exponential growth around 2016, where those make-on-demand libraries of tractable molecules emerge, pioneered by enamine, and I believe that the first speaker from Chemspace gave already like a very good overview of what those libraries are. So they're compounds that can be synthesized relatively easily, cheaply, but they are not in stock. And those libraries, they start to be over 1 billion around 2015, 2016. And right now they exceed, well, as you could see, trillions of molecules. It's way beyond the 10 billions of molecules. But perhaps libraries have been screened and prospectively tested. We probably didn't go above a few hundred billions yet. That said, even if we are going to look at these libraries, this is really a drop in the ocean of what the theoretical drug-like chemical space is, which was theorized to be around 10 to the power of 60 drug-like molecules, 10 to the power of 24, which were accessible by non-synthetic methods. This was a paper from 2002, so I'm sure now it's like way more. So even with trillion size library, we are like really just a drop in the ocean. We are looking for a drop in the ocean. Anyway, we have to work with what we have. So the justification of screening very large library with docking as opposed to the traditional in-stock libraries came from a seminal paper from the lab of Brian Schoikett in 2019, which published a work in Nature showing that, at least for a few targets that they have tested there prospectively, screening a large library versus screening an in-stock library can return better hit rates and better compounds, chemical novelty compared with in-stock. Of course, this kind of approaches, the computational cost scales with the size of the library. And again, I think the talks we have seen before have already illustrated this problem. But for example, if you were to take the zinc database in the year that it was published, each version, and screen with 640 CPU cores using Glide single precision docking, a standard commercial docking method, while it will take just a few days in 2005, if we were using this medium-sized cluster right now, or in 2020, they will take like 300 days just to do docking, which is, of course, not a time that is feasible, especially in academia or smaller companies. Okay, so in 2020, when I was a postdoc in the lab of art at UBC, we work on developing this new method that we named the deep docking, where a simple machine learning classifier is trained based on some features representing the chemical features of the molecules in a large library. So like a small sample is taken from this featurized version of the library. Usually we use Morgan fingerprints, but you can represent them really whatever you want, depending on the mode that you want to use. Those molecules are docked, and the docking scores are used as labels to train the model and then to predict over the entire data set. And we do that like iteratively, so I guess we can call it like active learning, where we aim at iteratively reduce the space where we focus the range of top scoring molecules that we want to classify with high recall towards like the different iteration of active learning. And we demonstrate at the time retrospectively that the method works pretty well across like different drug target families, although there is variability in the database reduction and the performance you see depending on the pocket you are investigating. And this is something that is still a bit unclear to me because it doesn't seem to be related just on the size of the library. Okay, so when Cache 1 came out, we jumped right into that. I guess Mathieu and everybody else already has talked a lot about Cache, but in Cache 1 we were tasked with finding its ligands for the WD40 repeat domain of leucine-rich repeat kinase 2, which is the most mutated gene in Parkinson's disease, and for which so far, before Cache 1, there were just known inhibitors binding to the kinase domain. So this is like the UD40 repeat domain, which is supposed to interact with other proteins, and nothing was correct. So at that time, I was still a postdoc in Ars Lab, and therefore we teamed with the labs of Oles Isayev and Maria Kornikova at Carnegie Mellon University, and we built a team to compete in this challenge. And since our collaborators are we had this deep docking technology that is open source, everybody can use it, and they were very interested in free energy calculation. We have used this rather detailed heat discovery pipeline where we start. It's pretty tedious to go through everything, but I'll try to summarize it the best I can. So we start from the enamine real database. It was 4 billion molecules at the time in this stereo-enumerated version. And we then use deep docking in an orthogonal way where molecules, like a cycle of active learning is run for one program, for example, GLIDE, and then those molecules that are supposed to be top scoring for GLIDE are then tested for with deep docking against another software. So in this case, out of the GPU and then ICM. So in this way, it's kind of like an orthogonal selection of molecules, and where the consensus is done on the predicted score rather than on the pose itself. So we end up with around 18 million molecules from these 4 billion at the beginning. And we have then used two strategies. One was by using consensus, so like docking molecules and check the RMSD between the pose of 2 or more programs, and selecting molecules that pass that. Or expert selection, where just we meet together and we look at the hits that come, the prospective hit, the potential hits that come from docking, and we decide based on our experience which one will work and which one not, like just visual inspection, expert selection. And then we pass 2 sets coming from these 2 selection through free energy calculation, absolute binding free energy, to come up with the final list of 76 molecules that we ordered. And just like to spend like a bit on the molecular dynamics refinement of those potential hits. So what we found was, I think Daniel was elaborating on like molecules flying away, and we found that actually there were a number of molecules was RMSD, that were flying away after we ran molecular dynamics simulation on them. But overall, both consensus, especially the consensus molecule and the expert one, were showing an RMSD at the end of the molecular dynamics simulation compared with the initial pose that was below 3 Armstrong. And this was one of the criteria we used also to keep that. If they were not below 3 Armstrong from the beginning, we discarded them. Also, another thing that we notice, but again, I always consider this kind of method to be one orthogonal to another, is that there was like very little correlation between docking scores and the delta G that we got from the free energy calculations, and also the number of molecules that were actually scoring very well in the absolutely binding free energy calculation was low. But again, the idea of using consensus scoring is to try to find the sweet spot of compounds that work well there. So at the end of the day, 59 compounds were tested. I believe the other one weren't synthesizable or the synthesis failed. And 5 out of those turned out to be hits. They were like classified as hits by Mathieu and the team at SGC. And this is like 8.5% hit rate, which consider this like a target that has no known ligands before, we consider to be like actually quite good. And in the second round, where we apply like a very similar pipeline to screen for analogs for our best chemical series that is based on this scaffold you see down here. 9 out of 32 turn out to be to show like a dose response in SPR in the second round. So this was like good, although again we use relative binding free energy for this analog expansion, and the compound that we found, there was not an improvement in the KD compared with the initial hit, which I believe was still 11 micromolar, and the one we found after was nothing exceed that. but still 9 out of the 32 analogs works. Okay, so encouraged by that, because our protocol, this chemical series was the one that, together with the group of David Coes that developed Nina, was the one that won the competition. I mean, got the highest score. So we were encouraged, and we skipped the number 2, but we participate to CASH 3, which focus on the SARS-CoV-2 non-structural protein 3 microdomain, or MAC1. And this was like an interesting target because differently than WD40 or even of the helicase in CASH2, there were plenty of information about the fragments, about the full compounds that were bound there, a lot of crystallographic studies, a paper in PNAS reporting tens of inhibitors with crystals, and therefore a system that what we thought was like more amenable, so where we could do like very, very well in terms of like hit rate and novelty. So we took as like one of the goals of this challenge was that the most potent molecules coming from this paper published in PNAS in 2022 show this carboxylic acid, and one of the requirement for the CASH number 3 was to identify compounds that didn't bear this charge group. And since this is a group that interact with some of the key residues interacting with the adenosine in the binding site, it was like pretty critical to identify groups that could still let the compound bind without having this charge. Okay, at that time I already moved into my current position at University of Ottawa, and but I was in the transition, so me and Art still like joined forces. And this time, since we were relying like something that has like a lot of structural information, we decided to do two things that were different from before. First, rely just on docking calculations and like its selection that we usually use. And the second one was to focus to a large library, but not a super extensive one. A diverse library. This is the enamine real diversity set. This was like a bet because one of the critiques that has been moved toward like clustering a library before doing docking, before doing any calculation, is that whatever is the central you take from any cluster you have there, you have no insurance that that's like the one now to be bioactive, or the one you can like detect bioactivity, because there is no criteria that you can use for that. But the enamine real diversity set, which now has another name, I think now is enamine sample, is basically a pre-clustered version of the enamine real database, but way more tractable in terms of the number of molecules. And when you screen a very large library, so obviously like, you get a lot of the, potentially it's at the top, they're like very congested, something that is amplified, especially when you try to predict docking score with machine learning, obviously. Whereas the enamine real diversity set doesn't have this problem because the molecules are way more diverse. Okay, so we start from 83 million molecules, but we remove anything that had more than 2 chiral centers, just because that dilute too much the potency when you test them. And we turn out to have like just 23 million molecules. And then in this active learning cycle, we have in deep docking, we use Glide, and we end up with 6 million molecules, but we dock a very small amount of molecules. We dock 200,000 molecules in total. And within these 6 million molecules, we're hoping to find the one that were above this score cutoff. That is what we use to define our classification threshold. And then again, we use like something similar to before, so like consensus docking on one side, and with consensus voting and expert selection on the other, and then I have also like a combined set that I will now elaborate. What is that? So for consensus docking is like just the typical consensus that sometimes work very well, sometimes doesn't, but selecting molecules was dock pose between 2 different programs are within 2 armstrong from each other. And we use Glide and ICM. And then consensus voting is simply using a number of scoring function on the poses that are being vetted by consensus. And in our case, whatever in each of the score, your molecules in the top 10%, you can then like rank them, assign like a vote of 1, and then at the end you can sum the votes. And then we have our expert selection done on GLIDE and on ICM, so like both of them are visually inspected. And then we have this combined one where kind of expert shortlisted molecules, so we're like, they were not like necessarily in the first list of experts selected, but they were also showing some consensus. So they have at least 2 votes. They have at least a scoring 1 in 2 of the 4 scoring functions we're using. And then we propose the hits for 93 molecules. And very interestingly, just 1 molecule overall turned out to be a hit. And this was coming from this combined set. So maybe you can say there you have a 10% hit rate, but I wouldn't stretch that far. I think it's just like a very odd, like a very challenging target to work and to discover real new chemistry. Because the bad news was that the molecule, at least in my opinion, as I think Matteo also yesterday mentioned, is not that diverse compared with the one we start from. But the good news is like that the carboxyl acid is gone. So, and we didn't use any, other than the crystal structure, we of course introduced a bias. We didn't use any machine learning model trained on known active. We're also able to solve the co-crystal for this molecule and turn out to be like the same, that we were the same pose that were predicted by GLIDE and ICM. And also like very encouragingly, even if the chemical diversity compared with initial hit was not great, all the 16 analogs that we proposed for testing displaced the ADP ribose peptide, and 12 of them were confirmed by SPR, so direct binding with that. And although, well, I'll show like the potency right after, but there were no charge groups, and there were show like good diversity in that group that has the bromine in the original hit that we found. And they were also like overall selective for MAC1. And as I say, like we also identify like quite a good space to work with that south group where in the original crystallographic hit from the PNAS paper there was the carboxyl acid. But the KD were more or less like in the same order of the initial hit. Okay, so the lesson learned from CASH so far, at least for me, is that machine learning accelerated virtual screening enable to look for this vast chemical space, and it works also for cold target. That one advantage of physics-based method that should be generalizable, more generalizable than machine learning for cold targets, a target where you don't have like any information about what bind there. But also we saw some very interesting trends that were very unexpected for me. For example, that you can get decent reasonable hit rates, even for something that was very, very challenging as the first target of Cache 1. And then for something where I was expecting that we will do, overall the challenge will do much better because the amount of crystal structure and of known active there, very low values were observed because if I remember well, the overall hit rate was in line with ours overall, like 0.9%, 1%. And I also like to, like other previous speakers mentioned, like to praise like how important is CASH challenge in this kind of benchmarking exercise, because it really allows us to understand a lot of the field of computational hit finding, computational drug discovery, and to evaluate methods in a more prospective and biased way than just what we can find often in literature where targets are cherry-picked and sometimes you don't even know what didn't work, and because it tends to publish things that work very well. Okay, just acknowledgement for my lab, Arts Lab, Oles and Maria Lab, and funding, FGC, and Conscience, and all of you for listening. Thank you.